Hey folks, this is Kalani. I actually can't believe that they decided to change something this important to patch 8.3 and its progression model. The infinite AP grind has been removed. I know, who would have thought that we might start to see some of the changes promised in the Shadowlands expansion earlier than 9.0. No endless grinds, no huge grind to begin with. It sounds almost too good to be true, but in the current PTR build, the infinite trait at the end of our Heart of Azeroth has in fact been removed. Let's have a chat about what this means for patch 8.3 and what the trait has been replaced by. If you weren't up to date on this whole matter, in the build just before this one, an infinite trait was added onto the end of our Heart of Azeroth progression. So it'd level up to 70, that's our current max, and then when 8.3 launched, we essentially wouldn't have a cap. We get another minor essence slot at 75, that remains the same. And then at 85, we were supposed to start putting points into the Purity of the World Soul trait. Each time you leveled up your heart after reaching 85, you would simply add another point onto this infinite trait. Each point would give you one more corruption resistance, so you can work towards wearing more corrupted gear without having to deal with so many negative effects. It was one of only two ways to obtain more corruption resistance, the other way being through upgrading your legendary cloak. If this trait had gone live, it would have meant that artifact power wouldn't really ever lose value. You would always stand to gain something from farming AP day after day, week after week, even after the last boss of the raid has been killed several times over. Corrupted gear has the potential to be incredibly powerful, but the negative effects that come with it are always going to be a shackle on its true potential. Corruption resistance is the only way to combat those negative effects, so the more you have, the more corrupted gear you can equip without dying, and the more powerful your character is going to be. That would give artifact power and your Heart of Azeroth level a massive amount of influence over how powerful your character could actually be. That's not really anything new. The minor essence slots are, after all, a huge power increase when you unlock them. That's not going to change for the new one we get in patch 8.3 either. Getting to 75 on your heart is going to be huge for everyone, but that's a one and done deal. It's not like there's another slot waiting at 85, and then another one at 95, and then another one at 105, or however high we could have ended up going with the infinite trait. It's important for there to be some power locked behind this grind, sure, but it should be achievable, and it should be something you can tick off your list. Giving that kind of power to an infinite trait that we can keep grinding and grinding, unlocking and unlocking, is unhealthy for the system as a whole. It would turn all forms of AP acquisition into yet another chore, so I'm happy they're getting rid of it. The dev team actually made a post talking about the infinite trait and their reasons for backtracking on its implementation. They said, "We've heard a lot of feedback from players and we agree that there's value in being able to reach a point when you're essentially done with artifact power." That's a huge sigh of relief from me. I really dislike the grind that artifact power has become, and that's coming from someone who only raids Mythic twice per week. I can't imagine what it would be like to be in one of these 20-hour per week guilds where every little advantage has to be exploited, every lead has to be maintained, every morsel of artifact power has to be picked up on the map on several characters. It's just insane to me. I'll get to 70 before the patch arrives, probably, but anything past that third essence slot is just gravy to me. The same thing will happen in 8.3. I'll put in more time and effort until I get the new essence slot, and then totally ignore it for the rest of the expansion. I'd rather be able to say, yep, that's one thing ticked off my list, I don't need to focus on that anywhere near as much as I have been, rather than, oh boy, here we go again farming artifact power for the 175th day in a row because I've got to get that extra point in the infinite trait. I am super happy that the dev team has listened to the feedback and they've decided to do away with the trait entirely. Usually I would be worried that instead of just cutting it out, they would have changed it or tweaked it as to be not as impactful, but this time they just straight up removed it. Your heart will be able to level up past 80 still, but you'll just get 2 item levels per extra level as you typically do, and that's it. All meaningful progression for the Heart of Azeroth will stop when your neck gets to level 80. You can finally say, I'm done with artifact power when you get to that mark. That does leave us with a bit of a power gap though. If we can't get any more corruption resistance from the Heart of Azeroth, does that mean we're suddenly capped at using a lot fewer pieces of corrupted gear? Maybe not. The dev team addressed this as well, and their wording is kind of interesting. To complement the removal of the infinite trait, they're adding an item in Visions of N'Zoth that players can earn once they've fully upgraded their legendary cloak to its maximum potential via horrific visions, or from defeating N'Zoth on normal, heroic, or mythic difficulty, or from fully completing a horrific vision with at least one mask active. This item will fortify the cloak, adding additional corruption resistance and allowing players to earn the ability to wear more corrupted armor pieces as time goes by. So the cloak will be everything when it comes to corruption resistance in patch 8.3. That's the only way you're going to get more, and you'll want to upgrade it as quickly as possible because the extra source of corruption resistance requires a fully upgraded cloak. We're not too sure how long that's going to take just yet, but a huge factor is going to be how many horrific visions you can take part in each week. From what I've tested so far on the PTR, it looks like you can get into 2 horrific visions per week fairly easily. That could net you 2 upgrades depending on how they let the items drop. Getting into more horrific visions past the first 2 will require a lot of grinding. We're talking daily quests, new rare spawns, events in the assaults, chest farming, and farming the minor visions for hours at a time. So we may have actually traded one grind for another, though at least the visions grind is something new, instead of doing the same world quests over and over and over again to get some more artifact power. That's the only way you're getting into another horrific vision every week if the PTR doesn't change at all from this point, which isn't really guaranteed. I mean, we're talking about one of the major progression points in the entire patch getting thrown out the window, so I'm not actually too sure how likely it is we'll see more PTR changes. Out of anything they could have changed, I would never have guessed they would throw out the infinite trait, but here we are. So anything is fair game at this point. Anything can change by the time this patch goes live. The sources of the new corruption resistance power are pretty typical. More horrific visions with a mask enabled, or from killing the last boss in the new raid tier. Raiders should be able to acquire at least one of those upgrades per week, providing of course you're taking down N'Zoth on at least one difficulty, though we'll have to wait and see how this whole process actually works when the patch goes live. I think it's going to be very difficult to test on the PTR, mainly because you need the cloak to be fully upgraded, and I'm not really sure we have long enough for that in the PTR cycle, and we don't have access to the bosses willy-nilly, so it's not like we can just go in and kill them to see if they drop something. I will keep progressing as best I can on the PTR to give you a better idea of how things work. Hopefully I can provide some useful insight, but if you were worried about the AP grind in patch 8.3, specifically because of the infinite trait that we covered previously and the corruption resistance it was offering, worry no longer. The infinite trait is no more. Now there was another interesting change made recently that sort of ties into the whole corruption deal. Previously all of the higher end crafter gear, you know, the stuff that's on par with the various raiding difficulties, all of that had corruption effects on it by default. That's actually kind of scary when you think about it. These items would have been 5 item levels lower than the raid gear, so you could have an item which is 5 item levels lower than mythic which you can craft, but they would have a guaranteed socket and a guaranteed corruption effect. The corruption effects weren't random either, which meant you could actively seek out the pieces that yielded the best effects for you. The only downside was the corruption that came with it, but this has also been stripped out on the PTR with a recent build. Crafted gear is back to just plain old crafted gear. No guaranteed corruption and no news of whether it can actually become corrupted. Corruption is replacing Titan Forging in patch 8.3 and crafted gear can't Titan Forge right now, so it's not a huge leap to assume it won't be able to be corrupted either. That's a huge 180 from the original plan, but oh well, at least crafted gear will still have a guaranteed socket, which actually might be a better deal anyway. Some of the corruption effects really aren't that great, but a socket is always going to be valuable. And while we're here, we may as well talk about some other news that cropped up recently. The way rewards are going to work for Mythic Plus dungeons in Season 4 is going to be a little bit different. So far in Battle for Azeroth, everything has kind of just been reset when a new season comes around. A plus 10 key has always yielded the best results from the end of dungeon chest and from the weekly cache, and everything was just scaled up to make sure we couldn't stomp dungeons too easily. In Season 4, the rewards will actually scale up to a plus 15 key instead. instead. So to get the highest item level loot out of a Mythic Plus dungeon and to make sure you have the very best gear waiting for you in the weekly cache, in Season 4 of Battle for Azeroth you'll need to complete a plus 15 key. We're not too sure how the scaling is going to work just yet, and with how many changes we've been seeing recently, I would hesitate to call the current PTR scaling a finished product, but I doubt they would make it significantly harder to clear a plus 15 key in Season 4 when compared to a plus 10 key in previous seasons. The number of a key doesn't actually matter all that much, it all depends on how they decide to scale it, so don't worry if you haven't done any plus 15 keys yet, or if you're only just managing to get a plus 10 key done each week, it might not be that much harder. It's just the new goalpost for anyone wanting to maximize their gear rewards from the Mythic Plus system. It's also really interesting that this is the first time they've scaled rewards up to plus 15 keys, from what I can remember in Battle for Azeroth anyway, and they just introduced some actual rewards to go alongside the Keystone Master achievement, which is obtained by completing a plus 15 key in time of each BfA dungeon. I don't think that's a coincidence, but the item level rewards for Mythic Plus are going to be a bit better as well. The weekly cache will contain Mythic Raid Loot equivalent item level gear instead of being 5 item levels below it. That's a nice change for anyone who relies more on Mythic Plus for gearing up rather than Mythic Raiding. And the highest item level obtainable from the in-dungeon chest will be increasing as well. A plus 15 key will drop gear that is 5 item levels above heroic raiding gear for patch 8.3. So Mythic Plus is actually going to be an incredibly valuable resource for anyone wanting to increase their item level quickly in patch 8.3. I think the main reason for this increase is that Titan Forging is taking a break for 8.3. That means that for Mythic Plus players, you can't get the crazy Titan Forges that put your loot on par with Mythic Raid loot or even higher. You won't be able to get an item level capped item anymore, which means that while Mythic Plus does yield some better initial rewards thanks to the item level bump, it's not going to be worth farming like it has in the past. Mythic Raiding gear should be a more reliable source of higher item level loot in patch 8.3, which is arguably how it should be anyway. The weekly chest will also have the same restrictions, no crazy Titan Forges, so it's going to end up being more useful earlier on as everyone is still gearing up, but the max potential from those gear sources is actually lower than in previous seasons. I think it's a really interesting change, and it kind of follows the same thought pattern as the infinite trait being removed. Right now the weekly Mythic Plus cache is always worth filling up because of the potential. What if you get a huge Titan Forge with a socket? That small chance is always going to be there, so it's always worth getting your dungeons done. If you take that away, suddenly you're in a position where you can say, yeah, I think I've got enough gear for now and the chest can't really give me something super stupid anymore, so I can happily skip over Mythic Plus this week and not feel terrible. It's definitely going to be a different mindset than what we've had for every other season in Battle for Azeroth, and I'm excited to see if players end up loving having that option or hate the fact that they aren't encouraged to do more and their potential has kind of been stripped away. Time will tell. So the artifact power grind has an end point in patch 8.3, the infinite trait has been completely scrapped, crafted gear will no longer have guaranteed corruption effects, and Mythic Plus rewards are changing a little bit in Season 4. Patch 8.3 might be giving us more of a taste of what the Shadowlands is going to be like than we may have previously thought. But that's it for this video. What do you think about the changes to the artifact power grind? Are you happy that we'll finally have an end goal, or would you rather have the open-ended progression path that the infinite trait was offering? Leave all your thoughts in the comments section below. A big thank you to all of our supporters over on Patreon. You can see their names floating by on screen. If you want to join these lovely guys and gals, you can find a link in the description below. Remember to leave a like just below the video before you leave. If you want to see more, make sure to subscribe. But apart from that, thanks for watching folks, good luck and have fun, and as always I will see you next time.